UFOs. UFOs have been seen by people on the planet for as long as there's been a planet.
Right.
The modern wave of UFOs after the war in 1947 began with Kenneth Arnold and his sighting of these chevrons up in Mount Rainier.
Right,
but
right.
The sighting predated that by 3 days.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And
so
that's all preceding Roswell by about a month.
Right, right.
And in fact, there are people who believe that it's all the same set of flying saucers. That there was a wobbling, dysfunctional flying saucer that was straightened up. A few days later, Kenneth Arnold sees that group up in Mount Rainier. A month later, the wobbling, dysfunctioning saucer crashes into Roswell. A lot of people look at it that way.
That's interesting.
But in any event, there was an Air Force investigation. There's actually... Kenneth Arnold himself was actually hired by a guy named Ray Palmer to investigate the Maury Island case. And Ray Palmer was a publisher of different pulp fiction pulp magazines called Amazing Stories and Fate, and he was really one of the popularizers of the idea of the flying saucer. He paid Kenneth Arnold to investigate of Crisman and Dahl, and Arnold didn't know what to make of it all, so he called in his friends in the Air Force. The Air Force sent out 2 investigators to recover this stuff, because Crisman and Dahl had both said that they recovered this slag that had been spewed out of that UFO, that they had pieces of it. And these 2 Air Force officers were sent out to get it. They collected some. Supposedly Crisman put a bunch of it in a Kellogg's cornflakes box and put it on the plane of these 2 investigators.
Right.
And the plane took off and it crashed. The investigators died, and the slag was never recovered, and Crisman kind of disappeared until 1968, when Jim Garrison, and if anybody's ever seen Oliver Stone's movie, that's what this is about. Jim Garrison starts an investigation of Kennedy's assassination, which had happened in 1963, and the main focus, the person he thought pulled the trigger, was Fred Crisman, who had witnessed this UFO. Now, if you see the movie, or if you know the story, Garrison wound up prosecuting Clay Shaw, but they really make it clear in the movie that was just a toehold on the bigger conspiracy. That was just what he had enough material on that he thought he could bring to court and get a conviction on.
Okay.
He didn't. But you hear about the Garrison case, you hear about Clay Shaw, but if you start studying the case, you'll start finding out about Fred Crisman.
So, I mean, actually, this reminds me actually a little bit of the X-Files. The black gooey, the black oil, or whatever they have, in the X-Files.
I'm sorry,
the black, substance or gooey or whatever you want to call it.
Did they do that in X-Files?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a black oil that actually is a living entity that actually invades people's bodies and make them, that actually turns them into an alien.
That's right. I think I saw that.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, again,
another interesting thing about all this is that at the time that Garrison was investigating Crisman, there was another popular television series that dealt with flying saucers and spies and stuff. It was called The Invaders. Do you know that show?
I've heard the name, obviously, but I can't remember seeing it, actually, no.
It was called The Invaders, and its main character was an architect who had gone down the wrong road one night, and he saw a flying saucer land, and he learned about this secret invasion, and he spent the entire series trying to convince other people of the invasion. Well, Crisman, in correspondence at that point, the Maury Island case was known in the UFO community, and even though Crisman kept a low profile, every once in a while he would emerge. And I think he may have spoken at 1 or 2 UFO conferences, but at the very least he corresponded with people, and he said in letters to them that he thought that television show, The Invaders, was based on his life. And the whole notion of his life, the whole idea that kind of emerges, is that he held on to this flag. He held on to proof of the alien invasion so that he could get the best assignments in the covert world, among them possibly being the Kennedy hit.
Really?
Yeah, so this is all very, very fascinating stuff, and it's stuff that doesn't, when you talk about the Kennedy assassination, you're usually talking with 2 groups of hobbyists, one who believes that it was the CIA and the other who believes that it was the Mafia.
Sure.
And what is left out of the discussion, of course, is the main thrust of the power politics as we were just discussing it.
Right,
the military industrial complex. And if you get back to what Kennedy was talking about the day that he died, it was the Tactical Fighter Experimental. It was a defense contract, a TFX, that later became the F-111, a contract that was supposed to go to Boeing aircraft in Seattle, but instead, under very controversial circumstances, Kennedy awarded to General Dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
This was the last speech that Kennedy gave on November 22nd, 1963. He was talking about the TFX tactical fighter, and Jim Garrison believes that Fred Prisman at the time was in the employ of Boeing aircraft, or, put in other words, that part of the military-industrial complex that represented the Boeing aircraft power structure that lost that defense contract to General Dynamics.
Right.
And this is so far afield, even though all this stuff matches up so perfectly to the historic record. It is so far afield from what people argue about when they talk about the assassination. First, you got the group that will, want to say that it's a lone nut. Then you'll get the people that will say it's a conspiracy, but those conspiracies really do not, fit into the main resonance of what is actually going on here. Is the suppression of a popular leader by the military-industrial state.
Do you think that the contracts that were given out here? Do you think that those could possibly have anything to do in regards to even let's say that we actually had a crashed UFO somewhere, things like this, and that this was involving back engineering, and that certain companies were actually given contracts to perform this to get saucer knowledge, if you will, and because of
there are a couple of things that support that idea. One is you're familiar with Philip Corso, right?
Yeah, sure.
The guy who wrote The Day After Roswell. He said that all the Roswell stuff was parceled out through the Foreign Technologies desk of the Air Force. And after the crash of the plane of the investigators of Maury Island, the counterintelligence team that was sent out to come up with a report on that said, if this kind of thing happens again, any kind of the material that was lost in this crash needs to be passed through the Foreign Technology Division, the same place that Corso says the Roswell thing happened. So that's one bit of support. But the other interesting area of history is that the TFX fighter that Kennedy was talking about when he died became the F-111 and was ultimately sold to the Australians, which opened up a funding corridor that eventually led to the development of Pine Gap, which is the Australian Area 51.
Really? No.
Yeah. So I would say in general, I can't, I wish I could tell you I have the proof that they were back engineering flying saucers in Roswell. I can't say that. But I can say that the current science fiction kind of night that the global military-industrial state has become does have its roots in all of those stories, about that kind of thing.
So is there a main overarching connection here then, meaning that what is being performed after this point is an alien agenda? Is there any kind of evidence or, hints leading in that direction?
Well, I think recently there were news stories about how they are once again talking about putting the missile shield, this time over Croatia. And we have had this history of the Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars program, the militarization of space. And if you go back, for instance, to the biography of Lee Harvey Oswald served in Atsugi, Japan, where the U-2s flew out of. He defected to the Soviet Union, and somehow at that point the Soviet Union got information they needed to shoot down Gary Power's U-2. The job that Oswald had before he went to the book depository was with Jagger Charles Stovall, a photo firm that processed U-2 film. And he was a spy connected to the U-2 program, and the U-2 spy plane was developed at Area 51. So, all of that is short of saying that, there's an alien agenda or something. There's certainly this kind of drive to bring the military-industrial control into outer space. And why is that? Is this about conquest of space, or is this about? I mean, what I'm getting at here, I guess, is a little bit that this is also about, a downed race on this planet. They're trying to achieve the technology and to leave the planet. You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, that's all certainly possible. That gets back to, there was this incident in Eisenhower's presidency where he disappeared for a day, and supposedly on that that the cover story was that he had chipped a tooth eating some chicken.
Right,
that he
right.
was a dentist.
Sure.
But I've got photographs in this lecture actually that I'm giving at Beyond Knowledge. I've got a photograph of Eisenhower with a big grin on his face the very next day. You didn't see any dental work.
Right.
And there's no real record of him going to the dentist. And supposedly during that day he went into diplomatic negotiations with Nordics or Greys or any number of different kinds of alien species that different people have identified. There's no real proof. There's no real proof, but there are other things, like, for instance, one big UFO story is that Jackie Gleason was the entertainer. I don't know if you know who Jackie Gleason was. He was a big television entertainer here. Was taken by Richard Nixon to go see the alien bodies.
Okay.
And Richard Nixon, of course, was Eisenhower's vice president. So there's all this kind of really intriguing stuff in the historic record that makes what you're saying more than just, speculation on our part. It's having some kind of grounding in actual history.
These things, there's no, I guess, testimony regarding these things. Do you know? I mean, do you know where these rumors first popped out? Either if we talk about Nixon and Gleason, or if we talked about the day Eisenhower went to the dentist, in quotes.
Okay, well, a number of researchers have worked on it. We know about the Gleason thing from Gleason's second wife, because Gleason told her the story many times.
I see.
And Bill Moore did a lot of research on the Eisenhower connection, but this is a matter of going to the Eisenhower library, and what you see is an absence of evidence.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
There's no record of Eisenhower ever visiting a dentist on that day.
Right.
Dentist has come forward.
But there's no hints at what actually happened, I guess.
The only, like I said, what I was referring to before, the only real smoking gun proof that still exists in any archive, and I should preface this to say that there are a lot of things that are now passing off as MJ-12 documents.
Right.
We do a regular conference in Vegas. Ryan Woods. There's a regular thing. There are lots of things that are identified as MJ-12 documents, but there's only one that's called the Cutler Twining Memo that exists in the National Archives.
Okay.
And it refers to MJ-12. And if it's fake, why is it still in the National Archives is one question. But the other completely different question, it has to do with a document called the Lou Douglas Memo. This is part of what my lecture is about. This was found by researcher Jim Martin when he was doing his biography of Wilhelm Reich. And it's one of these things where the Reich is sending a telegram to the Air Force about what he's doing out in the UFO, out in the field in Arizona, fighting UFOs with his cloudbuster guns.
Right.
And the date on that memo matches almost perfectly the date of the Cutler Twining Memo in the National Archives, which basically speaks of postponing an MJ-12 meeting until after some information comes in. So this was found in an archives in Tucson, Arizona, just a few years ago, as opposed to the Cutler Twining Memo, which surfaced 20 years ago in Washington, D.C. And the very idea that such documentation, and this is a triangulation of research, that such a perfect coordination of those dates is somehow a hoax, really totally defies logic. So that's why I say we have the smoking gun proof of the existence of MJ-12 when you combine those two documents.
So, but those are, as far as you know, then the only clear references to this point towards MJ-12. Is that right?
Well, what I'm saying is the coordination of those dates put that in objective reality. There are all kinds of MJ-12 documents that you can debate about. Some of them have signatures by Harry Truman that perfectly match other documents and are clearly forged. And there's hundreds of them now because of the work of Ryan Woods and I forget his father's name. But there are lots and lots of documents out there. Some of them are authentic, some of them could be forged. The debate about that can go on forever. But the debate about the existence of MJ-12